My neighbor called the police on me 3 times in 1 month, stood in the middle of our street and told every person who would listen that I was a thief, a liar, and a disgrace to the neighborhood. I had no proof. I had no witnesses. I had nothing. So I spent $200 on a 4K doorbell camera, pointed it at my front porch, and pressed record. What that camera captured over the next 3 weeks didn't just prove my innocence, it ended her life on that street, handed her a criminal record, and put her in the middle of a civil lawsuit she is still trying to wriggle out of. This is the story of how the most arrogant mistake a person can make is accusing an innocent man while standing directly in the frame of his camera. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I want you to understand exactly who I was before any of this happened, because the story only lands the way it should if you understand the kind of quiet, unremarkable life I was living when Karen Hollis decided to blow it apart. I was 38 years old, recently divorced, and I had moved into my house on Willowbrook Lane about 4 years before all of this started. It wasn't a glamorous street. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood where people threw rooftop parties or organized block celebrations with bouncy castles and catered barbecue. It was a normal, pleasant, moderately suburban stretch of road lined with mature oak trees and well-kept front lawns where people nodded hello and occasionally borrowed a cup of sugar and minded their own business, which was all I had ever asked of anyone in my life. I worked from home as a software developer for a mid-sized tech company headquartered in Austin, which meant that on any given weekday, I was sitting at my kitchen table by 8 in the morning with a coffee in my hand and my headphones in my ears, and I stayed there until 5 or 6 in the evening. I mention this because it matters enormously to what came later. I was home, almost always, when packages arrived. I ordered a lot online. Nothing excessive, nothing dramatic, just the ordinary accumulation of a person living alone who prefers the convenience of delivery to the anxiety of crowded stores. The UPS driver knew me by first name. The FedEx guy would occasionally wave through the glass of my front door. I had been living in that house for 4 years without a single problem, without a single lost package, without a single uncomfortable exchange with any of my neighbors, and I had fully expected that to continue for the foreseeable future. Karen Hollis moved in next door roughly 18 months before the situation I'm about to describe. She arrived on a Saturday in early spring with a moving truck, 2 teenage children, and an energy that I can only describe as coiled, the kind of energy that belongs to someone who is perpetually looking for somewhere to put itself. She knocked on my door the following afternoon with a plate of oatmeal cookies and introduced herself with the wide, effortful smile of someone who has rehearsed the introduction. She seemed pleasant. She seemed normal. She asked what I did for a living, complimented the color I'd painted my front door, and left after about 10 minutes without doing anything that would have raised a single flag in my mind. I returned to my desk and didn't think about her again for a week. But within a month, I started noticing things. Small things at first, the way she would appear at her front window whenever a delivery truck turned onto the street, tracking it with her eyes from her driveway, craning her neck to see which house it stopped at. Once, when a package was delivered to my door while I happened to be in my front garden pulling weeds, she walked over to examine the return address label before I had even picked it up, commenting casually on the company name and whether I was happy with their service. It was invasive in a way that was too subtle to confront, too pointed to ignore, and I filed it away in the back of my mind under the category of people who are more interested in other people's business than is probably healthy, and I moved on. Then, toward the end of that summer, my packages started disappearing. The first time, I assumed it was a carrier error, a missed delivery to the wrong address, the kind of thing that happens occasionally and gets sorted out with a quick call to customer service. I contacted the retailer, they shipped a replacement, and the replacement arrived without incident. The second time, I was more annoyed. It was a birthday gift I had ordered for my daughter, an illustrated book set she had been asking about for months, and according to the tracking information, it had been delivered at 2:17 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I had been at my desk 12 feet from the front door at 2:17 on that Tuesday. I had not heard the doorbell. I had not heard a knock. When I went to check after receiving the delivery notification on my phone, the porch was empty. I filed a missing package report, the carrier confirmed the delivery address was correct, and I spent the better part of a week in a low-grade state of frustration before the replacement arrived. The third disappearance was a pair of Bluetooth headphones I used for work calls, expensive enough that the loss created a real financial sting. I filed another carrier report, and this time the customer service representative mentioned that there had been missing package complaints from several addresses in my zip code recently, and that I might want to consider notifying local police if it continued. I thanked her, hung up, and stood in my kitchen for a long moment thinking about what that meant. Over the following 2 weeks, 3 more packages vanished. A phone charger, a bag of specialty coffee I'd ordered as a self-indulgent treat, and then the one that broke me, a custom-framed print I'd had made from a photograph taken on a trip to the coast with my kids, both of them standing on a rocky outcropping with the Pacific behind them, and the sun in their eyes, and the biggest, most unguarded smiles I had ever photographed. Gone. That was when I stopped being frustrated and started paying very close attention. The first time Karen Hollis accused me directly of stealing her packages, I genuinely thought I had misheard her. It was a weekday morning, around 9:30, and I had stepped outside to get some air and check on a plant I'd left on the porch the previous evening. I remember the temperature, the way the light hit the street that morning, the specific brand of ordinary that surrounded me, because what happened next was so completely outside the realm of anything I had anticipated that my brain photographed the mundane details around it in self-defense. Karen came out of her front door holding her phone, walking fast, and before she had even fully descended her porch steps, she was talking, loudly, with the precision of someone who had prepared what they were about to say. She told me that 4 of her packages had gone missing over the past 6 weeks, that she had confirmed with every carrier that they had been delivered correctly, and that she had asked around the neighborhood and 2 other people had also reported missing deliveries. Then she looked at me directly and said that since I was home all day, every day, and sat by the window, it stood to reason that I would know what was happening to things on this street, and she wanted to know what I had done with her packages. I stood there with my hand on my plant, and I looked at her for a moment that felt much longer than it was, and I said, as calmly as I could, that I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about, that several of my own packages had also gone missing recently, and that I found the implication offensive. She said she wasn't implying anything, she was stating it. Then she went back inside. I stood on my porch for another full minute trying to decide if what had just happened had actually happened. I went inside, sat down at my desk, and tried to work. I could not focus on a single line of code for the rest of the day. I told myself it was an isolated incident, that she was stressed and looking for someone to blame and had landed on me out of proximity and convenience, and that it would blow over. I was spectacularly wrong. 3 days later, she knocked on my door in the early evening and told me through the screen that she had spoken to 2 other neighbors on the street, Margaret, who lived in the yellow house at the corner, and a man named Phil, who lived across from her, and that both of them had confirmed seeing me loitering near mailboxes in front porches on days when packages had gone missing. This was such an obvious lie that I actually laughed, which I could immediately see was the wrong response. I told her that I did not loiter near anything, that I walked to the end of the street for exercise in the morning, and that was the full extent of my porch-adjacent activity, and that if she had a genuine concern, she should take it to the postal service or the police, not to my door at 7 in the evening. She said she planned to. Then she left. The following Saturday, she staged what I can only describe as a neighborhood tribunal. She had knocked on several doors along the street throughout the week, and on Saturday morning, when most people were home, she organized an informal gathering in her driveway under the pretense of discussing package security on the block. I was not invited. I found out it was happening because my neighbor on the other side, a retired teacher named Mr. Hargrove, who had lived on Willowbrook Lane for 23 years and had the moral compass of a Victorian-era schoolmaster, came over to tell me privately what was being said. Apparently, Karen had told the assembled group that she was 90% certain I was responsible for the thefts, had referenced the fact that I worked from home and therefore had opportunity, had suggested that my recent divorce meant I might be in financial difficulty, and had recommended that people minimize contact with me until the situation was resolved. Mr. Hargrove, to his immeasurable credit, had walked away from the gathering and come directly to my door to tell me what had been said. I thanked him with a sincerity I wasn't entirely able to express in words, and went back inside feeling something I had never quite felt before: the cold, specific humiliation of being publicly accused of something you did not do by someone with the confidence of a person who cannot conceive of being wrong. I was angry, I was confused, and underneath both of those things I was scared, because I had no proof of anything, and she seemed willing to say whatever she wanted with absolutely no regard for whether any of it was true. The police arrived at my door on a Tuesday afternoon, 3.5 weeks after Karen's first direct accusation. There were 2 officers, both of them professional and courteous, and they explained that a formal complaint had been filed by my neighbor at 114 Willowbrook Lane regarding the suspected theft of mail and parcels, and that my name had been included in the complaint as a person of interest. I want to pause here and describe what it feels like to stand in your own doorway while 2 uniformed officers explain that your neighbor has filed a police report about you. Because unless it has happened to you, the description doesn't fully land. There is a physical sensation to it, a kind of full-body tightening that starts in the chest and radiates outward. And there is a cognitive component, a rapid and frantic internal inventory of everything you have ever done or not done, as though the mere presence of a badge has made you guilty of something, even when you know with complete certainty that you are not. I invited them in, offered them coffee, which they declined, and answered every question they asked with as much clarity and detail as I could manage. I told them about my own missing packages. I told them I was home during the day and would have seen or heard anyone approaching my porch. I told them I had no knowledge of where anyone else's deliveries had gone and no motive to take them. They were polite, they were non-committal, and before they left, they told me that they would be speaking to other residents on the street and that I should contact them if I had any information that might be relevant to the investigation. Then they left, and I closed my front door and stood in my hallway and felt the full weight of what was happening settle onto me like something physical. Over the next 10 days, Karen filed 2 more complaints. I know this because one of the officers, a woman named Detective Reeves, who had handled the initial visit, called me to inform me of the additional reports and to ask whether my account of events had changed. My account had not changed. I told her that I was growing deeply concerned about what was happening, that I believed I was being targeted by a neighbor who had decided I was responsible for something I had nothing to do with, and that I was considering my options. Detective Reeves was sympathetic in a measured, careful way. She told me she couldn't share details of an ongoing complaint process, but that she advised me to document anything I felt was relevant and to consider speaking to a lawyer if the situation continued to escalate. I thanked her, hung up, and immediately called my brother Marcus in Denver, who is a paralegal and the only person in my life who could be relied upon to be both emotionally supportive and practically useful in a situation like this. Marcus listened to the full story without interrupting, which took over 40 minutes, and then he said 4 things. First, he said that based on what I had described, Karen's behavior could potentially constitute defamation and harassment if it continued. Second, he said that without evidence, there was very little I could do in either direction to defend myself or to pursue any kind of action against her. Third, he said that the single most important thing I could do right now was create a record. And fourth, he said I needed to get a camera. I had, in fact, already been thinking about a camera. I had been thinking about it since the second police visit, turning the idea over in my mind the way you turn over an option you want to take but haven't quite given yourself permission for. Marcus's advice was the permission. I got off the phone, opened my laptop, and spent 2.5 hours researching doorbell cameras. I was looking for specific things: 4K resolution so that faces and package labels would be legible, wide-angle coverage so that the full width of my porch and the stretch of sidewalk in front of it would be captured, cloud storage so that footage would be preserved even if someone tampered with the device, and night vision capability because I had no idea what time of day any of this was happening. By 11 o'clock that night, I had ordered the camera, the mounting hardware, and a 2-year cloud storage subscription. It would arrive in 3 days. I sat back in my chair and felt for the first time in weeks something approaching the sensation of doing something about a problem, rather than simply suffering it. The camera arrived on a Friday afternoon. I remember opening the box with the kind of focused, almost ceremonial attention that you bring to something you believe is going to change your situation, and the device itself exceeded every expectation the product listing had set. It was compact but substantial, with a wide-angle lens that the manufacturer claimed could capture a 160-degree field of view, a 4K sensor rated for excellent low-light performance, and an integrated motion detector that would trigger a recording and send an alert to my phone anytime anything moved within its range. The cloud storage subscription meant that every clip would be automatically uploaded and stored for 30 days, accessible from anywhere, and crucially, not dependent on any physical storage device that could be stolen or damaged. I had done my research, and I knew exactly what I was doing. I mounted the camera above my front door myself, using the included hardware and a level to ensure it was aimed precisely where I wanted it, centered on the porch, angled slightly downward to capture the full surface of the space where packages were left, with a field of view that extended to the sidewalk and, crucially, to the front corner of Karen's driveway. I want to be honest about that last point. I positioned it to capture my property fully, and the angle that resulted happened to include a portion of the public sidewalk and part of her driveway entrance. I did not point it at her house deliberately. I pointed it at my porch, and the geometry of the situation put the rest of it in frame. The installation took about an hour and a half, and by the time I had connected it to my Wi-Fi, downloaded the app, and confirmed that the live feed was working correctly and the motion alerts were active, it was nearly 6 in the evening on a Friday. I stood back and looked at the camera for a long moment, this small black device mounted above my front door, and I felt something I had not felt in weeks, a sense of quiet control. I didn't expect to catch anything dramatic. I told myself the most likely outcome was that the camera would simply prove I was who I said I was, a man who sat in his house working at a computer while packages were delivered and went missing somewhere on the street without my knowledge or involvement. I expected to gather footage of nothing happening on my porch, to take that nothing to Detective Reeves, and to use it as a starting point for arguing that if packages were going missing from this address, the camera would show it was happening without my participation. I did not expect what actually happened. The first week passed quietly. Several packages arrived, all of them safely, all of them present when I went to retrieve them, which I began doing within minutes of receiving delivery notifications as a matter of habit, and the camera captured normal footage of delivery drivers, passing pedestrians, a squirrel that spent an alarming amount of time investigating my welcome mat, and one of Margaret's cats from the corner house sitting on my top porch step for 20 minutes on a Wednesday afternoon as though it owned the property. I reviewed the footage every evening, going through the motion-triggered clips methodically, and I saw nothing that helped my case, and nothing that alarmed me. By the end of the first week, I was beginning to feel the earliest edges of disappointment, not because I had expected the camera to catch a thief, but because I had hoped it would at least catch something. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in the second week, at 12:47 in the afternoon, the camera caught something. Not nothing, not a squirrel, something. I was at my desk when my phone buzzed with a motion alert, which was not unusual. The alert had been triggering throughout the day for pedestrians and passing cars, and I had largely stopped jumping every time it went off. But something made me look at this one rather than dismissing it, some instinct I cannot fully explain, and I opened the app and pressed play on the clip. I watched the footage twice before I fully processed what I was seeing. I watched it a third time with my face 6 inches from my phone screen. Then I sat back in my chair and the air went out of me completely. The clip was 43 seconds long. In it, I watched my neighbor, Karen Hollis, walk from the direction of her driveway along the sidewalk in front of my house, mount my front porch steps with the ease and confidence of someone who had done it before, pick up a medium-sized brown delivery box that had been left against my front door less than 20 minutes earlier, tuck it under her arm, descend my steps, walk back along the sidewalk, and disappear in the direction of her own driveway. Her face was completely visible. The 4K resolution was everything the manufacturer had promised. I could read the expression on her face as she climbed my steps, and it was not the expression of someone doing something frantic or desperate. It was calm, almost bored, the expression of someone performing a task they had performed enough times that it no longer required conscious attention. She was wearing jeans and a dark green quarter-zip pullover. Her hair was pulled back. She carried no bag and brought no cover story. She just walked up, picked it up, and walked away in broad daylight at 12:47 on a Tuesday afternoon. I sat in my chair for a very long time without moving. I am not someone who is given to dramatic emotional reactions. I have worked in software development for over a decade, which is an industry that trains you to respond to problems with methodical analysis rather than feeling, and I tend to apply that approach to my personal life as well. But this was beyond the ordinary threshold of composure. I had spent 3 weeks being accused of theft by this woman. I had been questioned by police on 2 separate occasions because of formal complaints she had filed. I had watched neighbors who had been friendly to me for years pull back and become distant, heard through Mr. Hargrove about whispered conversations on the sidewalk and pointed looks from across the street. I had felt my reputation on this block, the simple, ordinary social standing of a man who keeps to himself and causes no trouble, erode in real time because of something she had said, repeatedly and publicly and with complete certainty. And here she was, on my phone screen, walking up my steps and taking my package without a moment's hesitation or a second's look over her shoulder, as though the very concept of consequence did not apply to her. I watched the clip a 4th time. Then I did the most important thing I did throughout this entire situation. I did not react immediately. I did not go to her door. I did not call the police in that moment, vibrating with fresh outrage. I did not post anything online, did not text any neighbors, did not do anything that could be characterized as impulsive or retaliatory. Instead, I opened my laptop, navigated to the cloud storage portal for my camera system, confirmed that the clip had been automatically backed up, downloaded a local copy to my hard drive, and then emailed a copy to myself, to Marcus, and to a secondary email account I kept for storage purposes. Then I went to the kitchen, made a cup of coffee, sat down at the table, and thought very carefully about what I was going to do next. Because what I had was significant. What I had was a single clip showing a single theft. That was meaningful, but it was not the full picture. Karen had filed multiple complaints about her own missing packages, complaints that had involved me by name, and a single instance of her taking one of my deliveries, while deeply damning, might be explained away by a sufficiently imaginative lawyer as a misunderstanding, a mistaken delivery she was helpfully retrieving, a momentary lapse in judgment that she had every intention of correcting. I needed more. I needed to know if this was a pattern, and I had a camera. So I continued to watch, and I continued to say nothing, and I waited to see what the footage would show me over the coming days. I did not have to wait long. The following Thursday, at 2:19 in the afternoon, Karen appeared in the frame again. This time she took a smaller package, padded envelope size, that had been left wedged slightly behind my mailbox by a postal carrier about 45 minutes earlier. Same calm expression, same unhurried pace, no hesitation whatsoever. The clip was 29 seconds long. I downloaded it immediately, backed it up in 3 locations, and added it to the folder I had begun building on my desktop, labeled with the grim satisfaction of a man who has found his evidence, simply documentation. Over the following 3 weeks, 22 days from the first clip to the day I finally took everything to Detective Reeves, my camera recorded Karen Hollis taking packages from my porch on 9 separate occasions. 9! Not 2, not 3, 9 documented incidents, captured in 4K clarity, each one backed up to the cloud and downloaded locally and emailed to Marcus and stored on a thumb drive I kept in my desk drawer. I watched every clip multiple times. I cataloged them in a spreadsheet: date, time, duration of clip, approximate size of package taken, weather conditions, any distinguishing details about her clothing or behavior. I tracked which package had been delivered at which time and compared it to the carrier's own delivery confirmation records, building a chain of evidence that linked each clip to a specific, documented delivery. The camera had also, in that same 3-week period, captured something else entirely: the deliveries that arrived safely and remained on my porch untouched, which proved conclusively that the thefts were selective and deliberate, not the result of random carrier errors or neighborhood-wide crime. Karen was choosing when to come, and she was choosing my address. What I found most striking, reviewing the footage with the distance of accumulated evidence, was how routine her behavior appeared. There was no urgency in her movements, no furtive checking for witnesses, no attempt at disguise. She walked up my steps and took packages the way a person walks into their kitchen and takes an apple from the bowl, as if the ownership of the thing had never been in question. It told me something important about how long she had been doing this, how comfortable she had become with it, and how utterly unprepared she was for the possibility that someone had started watching. During this same period, I learned from Marcus, who had researched the relevant statutes in our state at my request, that mail theft is a federal offense in the United States, carrying potential penalties including significant fines and imprisonment, and that the theft of packages delivered by private carriers constitutes grand larceny if the cumulative value of stolen goods exceeds a certain threshold, which in our state was $500. I sat down and made a reasonable estimate of the value of everything that had gone missing from my porch over the months before I installed the camera: the headphones, the book set, the framed photograph, the charger, the coffee, and several other items I had written off as carrier errors without fully examining, and arrived at a number comfortably above $2,000. I documented this estimate with purchase receipts where I had them and product listings where I didn't. Then Marcus connected me with a civil attorney, a woman named Sandra Park, who worked out of a firm downtown and who had experience with property theft and defamation cases. I had an initial consultation with her over video call, walked her through the full situation from the beginning: the disappearances, the accusations, the police complaints Karen had filed, the camera footage, the evidence I had collected, and Sandra listened to all of it with the focused, unhurried attention of someone very good at their job. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said that what I had was exceptionally strong. She said the camera footage established theft beyond any reasonable dispute. She said that the police complaints Karen had filed against me could potentially constitute filing a false report, which is itself a criminal offense, and that the public statements Karen had made about me to the neighbors, if they could be corroborated by witnesses, might support a defamation claim. She told me she wanted to see all of the footage and documentation before giving me a formal assessment, but that based on what I had described, I had both a strong foundation for a criminal referral and potentially viable grounds for a civil suit. I sent her everything that evening. The following Monday, I called Detective Reeves. I did not tell Karen what was coming. I made a deliberate decision, one that Sandra had advised and Marcus had reinforced, to go directly to law enforcement with my evidence before doing anything that could be characterized as confrontational or retaliatory. I called Detective Reeves on a Monday morning, told her that I had significant new evidence relevant to the package theft complaints that had been filed against me, and asked whether I could come in and present it. She told me to come in that afternoon. I arrived at the precinct with my laptop, the thumb drive, a printed spreadsheet of the clip catalog, and a printed summary Marcus had helped me prepare that laid out the timeline of events from my first missing package through the most recent camera recording. Detective Reeves and a second officer I hadn't met before sat with me in a conference room for nearly 90 minutes. I walked them through everything. I played every clip on my laptop while they watched in silence, pausing when they asked me to, rewinding specific moments, zooming in on the timestamps and the carrier confirmation details I had matched to each recording. I showed them the spreadsheet, I showed them the backup confirmation emails, I showed them the chain of custody documentation Marcus had suggested I create. When I finished presenting, Detective Reeves looked at her colleague for a moment and then back at me, and she said, with a quietness that carried more weight than volume ever could, that this was extremely thorough. She excused herself briefly and came back with a third officer who I understood was a senior detective, and I went through the highlights of the presentation again for his benefit. He had very specific questions about the camera installation date relative to the first recorded incident, about the cloud backup timestamps, about how I had stored and transferred the files, and I answered every question completely and produced documentation for each answer. By the time I left the precinct that afternoon, the officers had copies of all my footage and documentation, a formal statement I had given and signed, and the clear intention to open an investigation. What happened next took about 2 weeks, and I experienced all of it at a slight remove, receiving information through Detective Reeves rather than witnessing it directly, which was probably better for everyone involved. Karen was contacted by police for questioning. From what I was eventually told, she denied everything initially, which must have been a memorable moment for the officers who had spent the previous 2 hours watching 9 clips of her face in 4K resolution, walking up my porch steps and carrying my packages away. When the footage was presented to her, her account changed several times before she eventually stopped speaking without a lawyer present. She was formally charged with mail theft, filing a false police report on 3 separate counts, and separately, grand larceny for the value of goods taken. The mail theft charge alone, given the federal nature of the offense and the documented pattern of behavior across multiple incidents, carried substantial potential penalties. The false report charges were significant on their own, but what made them particularly damaging to her position was that the complaints she had filed had named me specifically and had been the direct cause of 2 police visits to my home and an ongoing cloud of suspicion over my life on that street. Sandra Park filed the civil lawsuit the following week, naming Karen for the value of stolen goods, for damages related to defamation arising from the public statements she had made to neighbors attributing the thefts to me, and for intentional infliction of emotional distress. Karen hired a defense attorney almost immediately, which was her right, and I had no feelings about it one way or another, but the attorney's ability to do anything meaningful with a case where the primary evidence was 9 video clips of your client's clearly visible face calmly stealing from a neighbor's porch was, as Sandra described it to me in a subsequent call with the restrained satisfaction of a lawyer who holds all the cards, quite limited. The criminal case was still moving through the system at the time I'm writing this, but Karen entered into a plea arrangement on the grand larceny and false report charges that involved restitution and a suspended sentence with probation conditions. The civil case was settled out of court in a mediation session that Sandra described as brief and not particularly contentious, for an amount I'm not going to state publicly, but which covered the value of everything I lost, my legal fees, and a sum for the damage done to my reputation on a street where I had lived quietly and harmlessly for 4 years. Karen moved out of her house on Willowbrook Lane approximately 6 weeks after the charges were filed. She did not knock on my door before she left. She did not send a letter. The moving truck came on a Thursday while I was working, and I watched from my window as the same process that had introduced her to my life, the truck, the boxes, the organizing energy directed at the task of physically relocating a human existence, reversed itself and extracted her from it. Mr. Hargrove came over that evening with a bottle of wine he said he'd been saving, and said, with the precise understatement of a man who had taught literature for 35 years, that he was glad the situation had resolved itself satisfactorily. I poured us both a glass and agreed that it had. The doorbell camera is still mounted above my front door. Every package arrives safely. The porch is quiet. And I have learned, with a clarity I could not have arrived at any other way, that the single most powerful thing an innocent person can do when faced with a lie is not to argue louder than the liar. It is to stop arguing entirely, point a camera at the truth, and let the recording speak.